We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph and Mesechet Kesubos. This is Kesuvos Daf 53a. The Gemara here continues the story. Again, the situation over here is Rav Papa is going to the house of his mechutin, and they're arranging the Ksuba. And Yehuda bar Meremar, he doesn't want to enter into the house. Gemara says, Chazi de lo havanichale. So he saw, Rav Papa saw that Yehuda bar Meremar did not want to enter. Rashi over here says, Chazer Rav Papa de lo nichale li Yehuda lemeal. Rav Papa saw that Yehuda didn't want to go into the house. Amar le, so he said to him, "My daitach, what's your reasoning? Why is it that you don't want to come in?" Mishum do Amar le Shmuel Rav Yehuda shinana. Is it because Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, he said, "Sharp one, lo tahave ba'avure achasanta afilu mi brabisha livra tava." Says that you shouldn't be present in a situation. Don't be present in a situation where they're avure achsanta, where they're transferring the Yerusha, where they're transferring the inheritance, even if you see a transfer of inheritance from a bad son to a good son. Because you never know what child is going to come out. Even a bad son might end up having a good child, and therefore you shouldn't be present when there's a transfer of the Yerusha away from who it should have went to. And certainly you shouldn't be present when it's going from a son to a daughter. In other words, he was saying maybe that's the reason Yehuda bar Meremar didn't want to go into the house, because what was going to happen over here was they were going to be writing up a dowry, and if they're writing the dowry, that's effectively transferring the Yerusha that's supposed to go to the sons, and instead giving it to this daughter who's going to get married, and that's why he didn't want to be present at such a thing. Rashi over here says, here they are transferring the Yerusha. He's writing over to his daughter as part of her dowry, that which he should have been giving over to his sons as an inheritance. But the Gemara continues, that's not a reason not to enter, because it doesn't apply in a situation of a dowry. Because this is really a takan of the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan are the ones that say that we want to encourage the person to give a large dowry. Again, that's the whole reason why you have this idea of the Ksubas B'nin Dichrin. The whole reason why you write into the Ksuba that the Ksuba is going to be inherited by her male sons, that by the sons that she has together with this man in the marriage. That's all to encourage this to happen, to encourage the dowry, as we said on the previous Amud. Again, that's what Rabbi Yochanan said earlier in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rashi over here says, Rabbi Yochanan said earlier, the whole purpose of this was that we want a person to give a nice dowry to his daughter. This was learned out from Sukkim, and so therefore that's exactly a reason why it should be done. There's no reason not to enter for that reason. And so the Gemara says, Amar Le, he said back to him, no, hani mili midaite. The idea that we want to encourage a person to give a dowry to his daughter, that's if he does it willingly. Lasuye nami, but is it also to force him to do that? In other words, the point is that if I come in, it's going to be like a pressure on him that he's going to have to give a larger amount. Rashi over here says, Lasuya nami bitmi, are we really trying to force this issue? So Amar Le, so he said back to him, did I tell you to go up there and to force him? I just mean come with us, but you don't have to force him. So Amar Le, so he said back to him, it's not true. Maloi didi hainu asiya. If I just go in, that alone will force him. It's going to be a pressure for him to give more money. Rashi over here says, Maloi didi hainu asuye knisasi imach zeu ishoy. If I enter with you, that is already forcing him. Shiyar belivsak b'shvil kavodi, because of my honor, he's going to want to give more money, and so therefore, again, that would be considered to be a problem. That's why I don't want to. And the Gemara continues the story, Achviye, which means to say Rav Papa, he convinced Yehuda bar Meremar to go, Va'ol, and he entered. So Ishtik v'Yosef, so he sat quietly, and he didn't say anything while he was sitting there. So Savar Ihu, Rashi over here says the text should be Savar Ihu, Abba Surah, who was the Mechutin of Rav Papa, he sees that he's being quiet, that Yehuda bar Meremar is being quiet, and he thinks, Hi, the Shasik Yehuda, Mirsach Rasach, Shein Hanadunya, Hogenes Beinav, he must be quiet because I didn't give enough money in the dowry. So it ended up that the fact that he was quiet was a pressure. So that's what it says, Savar Ahu Mirsach Rasach, so he says he's angry at me, I need to write in more. So Kasve L'chol Mai Dehavile, so he wrote into the dowry everything that he owned. He gave all the property over to the daughter. Lasof, at the end, Amar Le, he said to him, Hashtanami lo mishtoi mar. He says, you're still not satisfied. You're still not speaking in terms of the dowry that I gave. Chai demar lo shviki midil nafshoi. By the life of the master, I haven't even left anything to myself. I've given everything away. Why are you still not talking? So he said, Amar Le, he said back to him, Imi noi didi, if it's on my account, afilu hainami dechasaft lo nichali. Even that which you wrote originally is really not not pleasing to me, meaning to say, you already gave too much. So Amar Lei, so then he said, now he heard that really he gave more than he needed to give. So he said, Hashtanami Ahaderbi. He said, oh, so now can I retract? Amar Lei, so he said, no, Shavya Nafsha Hadrona Lo Kamina. I don't think you should render yourself a retractor, somebody who retracts a commitment. You've committed this amount to the dowry, that is the amount you should now give. And the Gemara continues, Boy minei Rav Yemar Saba me Rav Nachman. Rav Yemar Saba asked Rav Nachman the following question. Mochra ksubasa lebala. Let's say a wife, she sells her ksuba to her husband, meaning she says, if there's a divorce or the husband dies, she will not collect the ksuba, and instead, she wants to take money from the husband right now. That's the idea of selling the ksuba to her husband. So in such a situation, yesh lo ksubas ben indichrin, oein lo ksubas ben indichrin. Is there still the stipulation to the sons that they inherit the ksuba? Let's say she dies first, and it goes over to her husband. So then again, there was that line in the ksuba that the ksuba itself, that should go to her sons and not be dispersed evenly among all the children, among all the sons that this husband has. Let's say he has other wives. So is that stipulation still in effect or not? And the Gemara says, Amar le Rava, so Rava said back to him, V'tiboy lach mochelas. You should ask the same question. Let's say she's mochel l'ksuba. Forget about a situation where she sells the ksuba to her husband. Let's say she's mochel l'ksuba. We can still ask the same question. Is there the stipulation of the ksubas ben indichrin? So Amar le, so he said back to him, Hashta mocheres kami boili. Now when it comes to the case where she sells, that's a question to me. The avagav the ikol member, because even though one can say zuze ansua, that she was forced to sell because she needed money, she needed cash at that moment, and therefore there was a reason she had to sell. I can even say it's as if she was being struck with a hammer, as if in this case she was forced to do it. So therefore, in such a situation, even in such a situation, I have a question. So mochelis mi boy, do I even need to say a situation where she forgives the ksuba? Of course, by a situation where she forgives the ksuba, there is going to be the possibility that she loses out on the ksubas ben indichrin as well. And Rashi over here explains, Oein la, do we say that she loses out in terms of the stipulation of the ksubas ben indichrin? Mi amrinon, do we say, Kaven de machra labala, since she sold her ksuba to her husband, Pakal la Toras Yerushas Havia, so now the inheritance of her father, that dowry that her father wrote into the ksuba, that now leaves. Mi lahorish nedunya shelo livnei bito. That doesn't go straight to the sons of his daughter, to her sons anymore. Shari macharta, because she sold it. V'yein kol Yerusha b'mei achshav ela mikoach habal. Now that she sold it to her husband, we'll say the whole Yerusha really comes from her husband, and it goes to all of his sons, whether they come from her or whether they come from another woman. Let's say he has sons from two wives, they're all going to divide it equally. So then he said back to him, you should ask the same question. Let's say she forgives the ksuba, because that's something that's more common than a sale of the ksuba, where she would forgive it is more common. Now maybe you're going to say that in the case where she forgives it, but she doesn't receive any money, she doesn't get any cash for it, so therefore maybe it's different over there. But nevertheless, she's given up her zechus during her lifetime, so it should be the same question. And so he said back, Hashta mocheres mi boili. Now, when it comes to the case of mocheres, that I had a question. Kilomar mi savret mishum hana demata liyada. Did you think that my reasoning was it's because of the fact that she got paid for this because she sold it? That's why I said that her zechus went away because of the fact that she got paid. That's not even the reason. Hashta mocheres danusi. On the contrary, by the case of mocheres, she was forced to give it up. She needed the money. So there, salka datoy depaka zechusa. There, I have this possibility that maybe she loses her zechus. Umi boili, and I have the question. So on the contrary, kol shekein mocheles. Certainly, if she forgives the ksuba, the lo anusa, where she's not forced, certainly in that case, I would have a question, and I would say that maybe the stipulation of the ksubas ben indichrin would be no longer. And the Gemara continues. Amar Rava says, pshitali, it is obvious to me. Mocheres ksubas alacherim. Let's say she sells her ksuba to other people. So yesh la ksubas ben indichrin. Still, the stipulation of ksubas ben indichrin, it still applies. My time, what's the reason? Zuze ansua. Because again, she was forced, she needed money, and therefore she doesn't lose out in terms of the ksubas ben indichrin. And mocheles ksubas alabala. Let's say you have a situation where she forgives her ksuba to her husband. So ein la ksubas ben indichrin. So he says it's obvious that there is no ksubas ben indichrin. She's completely forgiven it. My time, what's the reason? Achule achilta. Again, she forgave it, and therefore it's obvious there is no ksubas ben indichrin dichrin in that case. Boy, Rava, but Rava asks the following question: Mocheres ksubasa lebala. Let's say she sells her ksuba to her husband. Kim mocheres la'acherim dami. Is it similar to selling it to other people? In which case there is ksubas benin dichrin. Okay, mocheles lebala dami. Or is it similar to forgiving it forgiving it over to her husband, where there's no ksubas benin dichrin? So that he had as a question. Basar the boy hader pashta. After he asked the question, then he answered it as follows: Mocheres ksuba lebala. If she sells her ksuba to her husband, kim mocheres la'acherim dami. It's the same thing as selling it to others, and there's still going to be the ksubas benin dichrin. Rashi over here says, Mocheres ksubas la'acherim. What does it mean when she sells her ksuba to others? Betovas hana means to say as follows. Betovas hana means as follows. Shim nisar mala onis garsha, that if she is widowed, meaning he dies first, or she's divorced, yitzalua lekuchos. So then the lekuchos, they're going to be able to collect the whole ksuba. Via mesa, but let's say she dies, yershena bala. So then the husband is going to inherit it, and they're not going to get anything. V'mesa, and she dies, v'yarsha bala. It ends up her husband gets it. In other words, she sells to these people who buy it from her for a lower price than the ksuba actually is. They buy the possibility of inheriting her ksuba. If it should be that the husband should die first or they get divorced, then they will get the ksuba. But then it turns out they get nothing, because what ends up happening is she dies first and her husband inherits it. So the question is, does the stipulation of ksubas benin dichrin still applies? Yesh levanek ksubas benin dichrin. So he said it's obvious in that situation that stipulation does apply. Takilo zevinta nami yoris labal. Even if she didn't sell it, the husband here would get it. That doesn't change. The sale was only in a situation, again, where she was getting the ksuba. V'tikin l'Rabbanan, the Rabbanan say there is this stipulation. Hashanami legabe bal b'mocheres lo pakazachusa. So too over here, just because she sold it, that doesn't make the stipulation of ksubas benin dichrin. She doesn't lose that right. V'imishum dehukal beinel l'mochru lahafsedes bonea im nesarmalo nesgarshin. Now maybe you'll say, oh, the fact that she sold it shows she doesn't care about her kids because she's giving up. Let's say she gets widowed or divorced, she's getting nothing, so she's giving up that money in a sense. That doesn't prove anything. Zuzeh on sua shehutzra cholahem. She was forced to sell it. She obviously needed money at that time. That doesn't mean she gave up that right. But if she forgives the ksuba, then she does. If she's going to forgive the ksuba, that shows that again she's not interested in it at all, and so therefore, in that situation, if it would go back to the husband because she died first, they would certainly not get anything. There would be no ksubas benin dichrin. But the question is, mocheres lebala. But what if she sells it to her husband directly? So that's sort of like forgiving it to her husband, but it's sort of like a sale. Nami tovas hana bi'alma davar muad. There also, when she's selling it to her husband, it's just a tovas hana. It's just on the chance that it should happen, that it goes to her. Let's say that he divorces her or he dies first, that it then goes back to him. That's the tovas hana. Sharei mesa yorsha, because the idea is if she dies, then he'll inherit her if she collected the ksuba. V'eno lokach mimeno eloshim mesu lo tigbe. He's only purchasing from her in the situation of that if he dies, then she won't collect. V'harei lo mes, but now he didn't die. Ubali de yerusha. Now you have the regular situation where it's an inheritance type of situation. So maybe we say that's the same thing as if she sold it to others. The fact that she sold it to her husband, maybe we say it's irrelevant. It's the same idea. She sold on the chance that she would collect the ksuba. She sold that, right? But now it's a situation of Yerusha where there was no collection of the ksuba. So maybe nothing changes. It's like mocheres lacherim. Okay, mocheres labaladami, or maybe no. Maybe it's like she forgave it to her husband. Since he was holding it, and again it was very light in her eyes, and she essentially gave it all back to her husband. So maybe then she does lose out, and the ksubas benin dichrin. That was the question of the Gemara, and again the Gemara ultimately answered that no, when she sells it to her husband, it's the same thing as mocheres lacherim. It's the same thing as if she sells it to others, and the stipulation of the ksubas benin dichrin would still apply. And the Gemara continues, Meisiv Ravidi Barav, and Ravidi Barav asks a question on this. This is from a Mishnah in Yevamis. It says in the Mishnah in Yevamis, Meisa, let's say she dies. We'll see Rashi in a moment what the case is. Ein yorshin shel zeh, ein yorshin shel zeh. So let's say there are yorshim of both of her husbands. So neither of them yorshin ksuba. So neither of them are able to inherit her ksuba. Rashi over here says, ein yorshin shel zeh, Mishnah hi b'Yevamis ha'isha shalach ba'al l'medinas hayom. This is a Mishnah in Yevamis. Let's say you have a woman, so her husband goes on a faraway trip. V'yamar lo yirechad me'isbalech. One witness comes and says that he died. The husband dies. V'yitiru ali nase v'nisis, and so therefore they permitted her to remarry. She marries somebody else. V'yachar kach ba ba'ala, and then it comes out that her husband comes home. So it turns out that she married really when she was already a married woman. It turns out effectively she committed adultery, but it was by mistake. She thought that her husband had died. So the halacha is Teitzeh Mizeh Mizeh. She has to separate from both of them. She cannot remain married to the second man. She can't remain married to her first husband. Ve'ein lo ksuba lo mizeh v'lo mizeh. She doesn't get a ksuba. She loses her ksuba from both. V'yemesa, and if she dies, ein yarshin shel zeh v'zeh bonim sheyesh la mizeh mizeh yarshin ksubasa. If she dies, so that's what it says, they don't inherit the ksuba. And so the Gemara now continues, v'havinon ba. So we ask a question on this Mishnah. Ksubasa ma'avidita. What ksuba are you talking about over here? We said she doesn't even receive a ksuba. So what does it mean that if she dies, they don't inherit her ksuba? There is no ksuba over here. So what does that mean? And so the Gemara says, V'yamar Rav Papa. So Rav Papa said on that Mishnah, ksuba has been indichron. We're not talking about just the regular payment of the ksuba. We're talking about the stipulation of the ksuba has been indichron. Rashi over here explains, you said she doesn't receive her ksuba, and then you said that if she dies, so then the Yarshim, they don't get her ksuba. There is no ksuba to get. And Rav Papa explained, no, we're talking about ksuba has been indichron, meaning as follows. Here's what the Mishnah means. Let's say the situation is she dies while the two men are alive, so she never collects the ksuba. So again, in that situation, the ksuba stays with the husbands, and there is this stipulation that her ksuba, her portion of the ksuba, should be inherited by her children. It should not be dispersed evenly. That's ksubas ben indichrin. V'yarshu haim. So again, they're now going to inherit. The husband's inheritance is going to go to their yarshim eventually. So ein bonim sheyesh la mizeh mizeh notelas ksubas imon ktivnin indichrin. So the children that come from each husband, they don't get a right to that ksuba like the normal stipulation of the ksubas ben indichrin. Kishaboin lachlok ben ichseyavim, when they eventually will come to divide up their father's property. Elachokim b'shava. Rather, each father is going to give it to his sons equally. There's going to be no stipulation of ksubas ben indichron over here. That's how Rav Papa understood this Mishnah in Yavamas. And so the Gemara now says, V'yamai, why should this be the case? Hachanami, here also, Lema, we should say, Yetzer Unsa. We should say over here that the Yetzer Hara was like an onus. It should be very similar to selling the ksuba. We said if a woman, we just said above that if a woman sells her ksuba to her husband, so she doesn't lose out on the ksubas ben indichron, it's the same thing as if she sells it to other people, because the idea is that she was forced to sell because she needed the money right away. So over here also we should say she was forced in this situation to give up the ksuba because of the situation where she married that second husband. That was because she wanted to remarry. She thought her husband had died. We should say it's the same thing. She shouldn't lose out. Rashi over here says, V'yamai, kevan de'amrinan ki anisa lo mifsa the ksubas ben indichron. If we said before when she sells the ksuba, so she's forced into selling the ksuba, she needs the money, and she doesn't lose out on the ksubas ben indichron. So name a yetzer on, so we should say the yetzer hara forced her over here. Shaisa misav lebal, meaning to say she wanted a husband. Her husband traveled far away. There was one witness that he had died, and she wants to be a married woman, and therefore also she was forced kind of into this situation. And so we should say the same logic, the ksubas ben indichron should not be lost in this situation. And so the Gemara answers, no, Hasam over there in that Mishnah in Yavamas, Kenasahu the Kansur Rabbanan. There it's actually just a fine that the Rabbanan impose, as Rashi over here says, Kenasa Mishum de Lodaika Shapir Shemes Bala Mekami de Tinsav. Over there the idea is when one witness comes and says her first husband had died, so therefore we're really expecting that she's going to investigate the matter and be careful before she gets remarried, and therefore in this case she obviously did not investigate properly. It turned out her husband was alive, and therefore this is a fine that they impose, that there's no longer the stipulation of ksubas ben indichron. And the Gemara continues, Yosef Ravin Bar Chanina Kamid Rav Chisda. Ravin Bar Chanina, he sat in front of Rav Chisda. Yosef Kamer Mishmei Rav Elazar, and he said in the name of Rav Elazar as follows: Mocheles ksubasa lebala. Let's say you have a woman who forgives her ksuba to her husband. Ein lo mizonos. So she also she's not entitled to mizonos. Let's say she becomes a widow. There's a general halacha that she is supported. She gets mizonos from the estate of her husband. That does not apply if she forgave the ksuba. So Amar Lei, so he said to him, Ilav de Kamer li Mishmei de Gavra Rav. If not for the fact that you told me this in the name of a great person, Hava Amin Allah, I would have thought the opposite. I would have said to you, Mei Shivra Tachas Tova Lo Tamash Rami Beis, somebody who repays something evil for something good, that's a bad thing. There should be no evil leaving that person's house, meaning to say, she forgave the ksuba to her husband, which was a nice thing she did for her husband, and now the payback is she's not even going to get mizonos as a widow. That doesn't make sense. Yosef Rav Nachman v'Ula v'Avimei bar Rav Papi. So Rav Nachman and Ula and Avimei bar Rav Papi were sitting. V'Yosef Rav Chia bar Ami Gabayu and Rav Chia bar Ami was sitting by them. Also, who Gavra the Shchiva Arusasu, and a particular individual came, and it happened to be he was betrothed to a woman, and that woman had died. So Amri Lei, so they said to him, Zil Kavar. They said, you have to go, you have an obligation to bury her, to pay for the funeral. Oh, have la ksubas, or otherwise you have to give her the ksuba. You're going to have to do one or the other. So when they said that, Amar Luhu Rabbi Chia, so then Rabbi Chia, again, Rabbi Chia Barami was sitting by them, he said to them, Tanina, didn't we learn, Ishto Arusa, that when you have a situation of his wife who's just an Arusa, it's just a situation of an heiress and a betrothal, so lo onen velo metame lo, he doesn't become an onen, let's say she dies, he's not metame to her, if she dies, v'chein he, and the same the other way around, lo onenes, she doesn't become an onen, let's say he dies, v'lo metame lo, and she's not metame to him, and similarly, mesa eno yarsha, let's say she dies, he doesn't inherit her, mes hu go v'ksubasa, but if he dies, she does collect her ksuba. But the Gemara infers as follows: Taima de Mesu, the reason why she's collecting the ksuba is because he dies. Hamesa he, but if she dies, ain't la ksuba. Apparently there is no ksuba over here. So why are you saying that he has to bury her or else give her the ksuba? Isn't there no ksuba in this situation by an arusa? And Rashi over here says, oh, have la ksuba. Again, they told the gentleman either you have to take care of the funeral or you give her the ksuba. Tetiknu kvurasa tachas ksubasa, because the burial is instead of the ksuba. V'savar lememar tachas monim masayim shetiknu lochach. And the idea they thought was, instead of the 100 or 200 that you pay to the woman, let's say the husband dies and gives the ksuba, so in a situation where she dies, so the kavura is instituted that he has to pay for the funeral. So he said back to them, Tanina ani shona she'ein la arusa shemesa mishpat ksuba dehainu kavura. But I said, I learn as follows, that it's not true. By narusa there is no din of ksuba, and there is no din that he has to take care of the burial, because again, what do we say by an arusa lo onen leyaser bekadshim? First of all, there's no status of onen in a situation of betrothal, so he's not aser in kadshim. V'lo metame lo, and he's not metame to him. Kohen who, let's say by a kohen, normally he would be metame to his wife, but that's not by an arusa. The lav she'ero, that's not called she'er. V'lo metame lo, also the other way, she's not metame to him. Eina chayeves li tame lo, she's not chayev to become tame to deal with his burial. V'af apisha mitzvah l'sasek b'shisha meisei mitzvah hamurim b'parshas kohanim. Even though usually there's a mitzvah to take care of these 6 meisei mitzvah. T'chsiv lo yitama mitzvah zu eina mehem the lav she'ero. That mitzvah doesn't apply here. It's not she'ero. Again, it's just an erison. Aval imrotzi li tamein musheres. Rashi just points out, if she wants to become tamei, she's certainly allowed to. The prohibition to become tamei is only on kohanim. Eina musheres mi l'tamei. There's nothing wrong with her becoming tamei. It means she doesn't have to. Afilu kohenes de bnei Aaron ksiv lo benos Aaron. It's only bnei Aaron, not benos Aaron. Even a kohenes is allowed to become tamei meis. Eino yarsh. And again, we also say there is no inheritance over here in the dunyas beis avia. He doesn't inherit the dowry. The idea of the husband inheriting his wife is only after the chuppah, or if she's given over to the shluchim of the husband, as we said earlier. Now, if he dies while she's alive, so gova ksuba, so then she does collect her ksuba. Monem masayim v'tosefes and kasav, she'll collect the 100, the 200, and anything additional. But again, that's only if he dies. But let's say she dies, ain lo ksuba. It sounds like there is no ksuba, meaning there's no din ksuba, there's no laws of the ksuba. Ukvurasa tachas ksubasa, and the kvura really is an exchange for the ksuba. In a situation where she dies, she gets the kvura instead of the ksuba. Tanya le'el b'nesua tanya v'tachas nedunyas beisavia shu yarsha. It says by a nesua. What is it said by one who's married? It says by a situation of nesuin. So instead of the dowry which he inherits, aval hacha kevan dechi mesa eno yarsha. But here, no. Here he doesn't inherit the dowry. We just said by an erison he doesn't get to inherit her dowry. So afulon is chayiv lekovra. So too he's not chayiv to bury. In other words, what he was saying is that really the obligation of the husband to bury the wife is in exchange for the fact that he inherits her, that he gets that dowry. That doesn't apply over here. So therefore he was arguing there should be no obligation on the husband to bury her. And the Gemara continues, my time, and what is the reason for this? Why do we say that there is no obligation by this case of an arusa for the husband to take care of the funeral? Rashi over here says, my time de amrinon ki mesa b'chayev. Why is it that we say that when she dies in his lifetime, ein lo tviya she has ksuba, that she has no claim of the ksuba. Tikaver b'shvil monim masayim shu yorish, because of the 100 or 200 again that he would have had to pay her had he died first, or let's say he divorced her. Now he's inheriting that. Now that she dies first, she doesn't get that. So therefore, in exchange for that, there should be an obligation for him to take care of the cost of her funeral. And to that, the Gemara says, Amar Rav Hoshia says, She'einani korei bo l'cheshetin nase la'acher titli masha kasav lechi. There's a line in the Ketubot that says that if you go and you're going to marry someone else, then that amount that I wrote over to you will be collected, and it will go to the husband that you will marry. And Rashi over here says, She'einani korei v'kacha yukozvin v'shtar ksubasa. They would write this line in the Ketubot that again, when you get married, titli masha kasav lechi. Hilkach therefore calls man shalomeis. If you have a situation where he didn't die, where the husband didn't die, but again, she died first. Velonis garshin, he didn't divorce her, so therefore lonish tabidla. So now there is no obligation that that shibud never took place. Velo yoresh mimena klum, and he's not going to be inheriting anything from her because there really was no obligation of the 100 and 200. In other words, what the Gemara is answering is this 100 and 200. It's not something that he has now inherited from her, and therefore he has to bury her. That's not true. He hasn't inherited anything from her because there was no obligation yet to pay the 100 and 200. That obligation to pay that 100 and 200, that only happens when she is alive, in a situation where he dies or in a situation where he divorces her. Since that never occurred over here, there was nothing that he inherited from her. Now again, had he inherited from her the nedunya, the dowry, so that would be a different story. Then we would say he has to bury her, but that only applies in a situation of nesuin. It does not apply in a situation of an arusa, and that's why again there's no obligation upon the husband by an arusa to take care of the costs of the funeral. And the Gemara continues, Kiyasa Ravin Amar Reish Lakish. When Ravin came, he said that Reish Lakish said, Arusa Shemesa Ein Lo Ksuba. Again, if you have a case of Erusin where she dies, there is no Ksuba. Again, the same idea as before, and there's no obligation, therefore, for the husband to take care of the cost of the funeral. Amar Lu Abaye, so Abaye said to them, Zilu Amri Le, go and you should say to him, tell him about what he just reported, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Gimel Amud Beis.